A guard from the SEC who shot 43% from three last year caught Mark Few's attention in the transfer portal, and it's not hard to see why.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Folks, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Well, Gonzaga contacted a hard-nosed, high-scoring guard out of the transfer portal. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the latest move from St. Mary's in the transfer portal. They're bringing in another big, why they might be doing that. We got some other WCC portal updates to get to, and then we'll close out the show talking about a pair of front court additions for Coach Lisa Fortier and the Gonzaga women's basketball team, much needed after losing Yvonne Ejim and Maud Hybens after last year. We'll get to that to close out the show. But we're starting today with another transfer portal target for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs. A report from Tobias Bass of The Athletic that Gonzaga has reached out to transfer guard Duke Miles, who is in the transfer portal after a successful first and only season with Porter Moser and the Oklahoma Sooners. Miles is a 6'2" guard from Montgomery, Alabama. He was not a highly regarded prospect coming out of high school. He began his college basketball career at Troy in the Sun Belt back in 2020. And he spent 3 injury-riddled seasons playing for the Trojans of Troy. But throughout those seasons, despite not playing until he played 26 games as a freshman, started 20 of them. Then he played just 17 games as a sophomore, and then he played just 6 games as a junior, dealing with those injuries, part of the reason he still has eligibility at this point in his college career. But we saw him really blossom into a very, very good player while at Troy. He played in 49 games with the Trojans, started 25 of them, played about 23 minutes per game. All told, across those 3 seasons, he averaged about 9 points, 3 assists, 2.5 boards, and a little under 2 steals per game. Has always put up very excellent steal numbers throughout his college basketball career. Wasn't a great three-point shooter while at Troy. Over those 3 seasons combined, he shot just under 28%. Was also not a very high volume shooter, just 2.3 three-point attempts per game on average. So wasn't taking a lot of threes, wasn't knocking down a lot of threes, was a much more effective scorer around the rim, 53% on his 2-point attempts, which is very good for a 6'2" guard at any level. And we saw that actually get better as his career went on. And looking at the three-point shooting, like 28% for his 3 years at Troy is not great, but he was 18.5% as a freshman, which is obviously very bad. But that increased dramatically to 31% as a sophomore. And then as a junior, again, only 6 games. So that is a very significant caveat. He shot 47%. Again, I think you take that with a very significant grain of salt, but you saw dramatic improvement as a three-point shooter during his time at Troy. After those 3 seasons, he hits the transfer portal. He lands at High Point in the Big South Conference and full-on breaks out. With High Point, Miles played 33 games, started 27 of them, played about 30.5 minutes per game, and had a huge season. 17.5 points, 3.6 assists, 2.5 boards, 1.3 steals. He was insanely efficient, again, as a 6'2" guard. And the Big South is not, it's not as good even as the WCC. It's certainly not a high major caliber conference, but a 6'2" guard shooting over 60% on 2-point attempts is outstanding at any level of Division I college basketball. And for a high volume scorer like Miles, again, 17.5 points a game, he was taking 10 2-point attempts per game, and he was knocking them down at a 60% clip. He also shot 36% from 3 on a little under 4 attempts per game. He was also 80% from the free throw line. He was a first-team All-Big South player. He led the conference with a 58.3% effective field goal percentage, literally one of the most efficient scorers in all of college basketball while at High Point, the most efficient scorer in the entire Big South Conference. So after that year, Miles hits the transfer portal again, understandably coming off a huge year at a smaller program, and he lands in the SEC, the best conference in college basketball last year. He lands on Porter Moser's Oklahoma Sooners team and has a great season. with Oklahoma. 34 games, started every single one of them, played about 25 minutes per night, averaged 9.5 points, 2.5 boards, about 2 assists, 1.4 steals. Once again, has averaged well over 1 steal per game in every single season of his college basketball career. And last year we saw what I would kind of categorize as a Ryan Woolridge effect as a three-point shooter. He goes from being at High Point, he was a big-time player at Troy and was asked to take on a big scoring load, even in those seasons where he was dealing with injuries. And then at High Point, he was the guy, and he still shot 36% from three, even while being the guy. But then he goes to Oklahoma, where he's not the guy. They have Jeremiah Fears. He's more the guy. They have more post presence than other teams that he's used to. And he goes out and shoots 43% from three. Now, it was not a huge sample, 2.7 attempts per game, but that's also not nothing. Like close to 3 threes per game is a decent enough sample for it to see him shoot 43%. You feel pretty good about that. And we talked about his efficient 2-point scoring in the SEC, the toughest, most physical, strongest conference in college basketball. This 6'2" guard shot 58% on 2-point attempts. He is tough. He is physical. He can finish through contact. He's got a good mid-range game. He was also 83% from the free throw line on over about 2.5 attempts per game. He's always been a good free throw shooter. He's always been an efficient 2-point scorer. Now we've seen that 3-point shooting for 2 years in a row look fairly consistent. There's a big difference between 36 and 43, certainly, but both are still pretty good for a player who relies more on his 2-point scoring than his 3-point scoring. We saw him have some great individual performances last year as well. He had a huge game in the non-conference against a bad opponent, but he also had some big games against quality teams. He had 18 points, 5 steals, and 3 assists on 5 of 9 shooting in a road game against Missouri. He had 17 points on 5 of 11 shooting in the non-conference against Michigan, who got a 5 seed last year. He had 15 points, 5 assists, and 4 rebounds on 5 of 8 shooting in another true road game, this one against Chris Beard and Ole Miss, one of the best defensive teams in the country. We saw him do some excellent things for a good Oklahoma team last year. And then the offseason happens, and it's been kind of a weird offseason for Duke Miles. He entered the transfer portal. He committed to Virginia. And then about a week later, he decommitted from Virginia. A little bit after that, he commits to Texas A&M, a new look roster for A&M after Coach Buzz Williams leaves and goes to Maryland. Bucky McMillan comes in, brings in Duke Miles, but then also brings in Rylan Griffin, and Duke Miles decommits again. So he was committed to Virginia, decided he didn't want to go to Virginia, committed to Texas A&M, was released from his NLI at Texas A&M, and is now back in the transfer portal. And according to Tobias Bass of The Athletic, Gonzaga is one of many programs that has already reached out to him now that he is back in the transfer portal. The rest of that list includes Georgetown, Virginia. Guess they're back in the mix for Miles after letting him go the first time. Tennessee, USC, Baylor, Iowa, Vanderbilt, Arizona State, St. Mary's, West Virginia, and of course Gonzaga. Tobias also reported that Georgetown is hosting Miles on a visit today, Wednesday. As I'm recording this, the visit is Wednesday and Thursday. So as you're listening to this, the expectation is that Miles is on campus with Ed Cooley and the Georgetown Hoyas. Again, it's notable that Virginia's looking at him again. He obviously liked the pitch enough to go there the first time. Maybe he'll make it work this time around. He definitely fits the Gales as a tough-nosed, physical, good defensive guard. I could see that being a fit for him. And Tennessee as well. They always love their tough guards, and certainly everything about Miles and the fact that he has familiarity in the SEC certainly make that a logical destination for him as well. And in terms of his fit at Gonzaga, he's a smaller version of Caleb Battle. Again, we said he's 6'2". Battle is 6'5", built like a linebacker. Miles is not built like that. But in terms of like what his role would be, I think that's kind of what you'd expect. And I think if Miles were added to Gonzaga, you would have 6 foot Braden Smith, 6'2" Duke Miles, 6'3" Adam Miller. Definitely a little bit of a concern. Now you'd also have 6'7" Jalen Warley, 6'5" Emmanuel Innocente, 6'7" Steele Venters. Like you have some size still on the wing, so it's not a huge issue. But I do think that's something Gonzaga is at least weary of when looking at players to pursue in the portal. But Duke Miles is great at getting to the free throw line. He's always been excellent at converting at the line and getting to the stripe. He's a 35% career three-point shooter who shot really well last year in an offense that was a bit more opened up. I think that you could expect that to translate at Gonzaga. Again, does that mean he shoots 43? Not necessarily, but I think he's going to be better than that, like 32, 34 that he was for most of his career at Troy. So I think you're going to see a good shooter. I think you're going to see a productive offensive player. He's also a great defensive player. His career 1.5 steals per game. He would be a disruptive player on that end of the floor and fill a role that I think Gonzaga needs. They have good on-ball defenders in Innocente and Jalen Warley, but I think a third really good on-ball defender who's disruptive, who's tenacious, who's physical, really would help this Gonzaga team feel like they have this kind of nastiness to them on the defensive end of the floor that we haven't really seen from a Mark Few team in quite a while. And Duke Miles would really emphasize that on this roster. Looking at Evan Miyakawa's data, for those of you who don't use this site, it is tremendous. Highly recommend if you want to look into some of the players Gonzaga is interested in the transfer portal. There's player profiles for each player in the transfer portal, and it gives you an overall grade and then some percentages based on how effective Evan's data kind of perceives these players to be next year. So looking at Duke Miles, overall, he got an A- in the 94th percentile. Offense is 95th percentile. Defense is 86th percentile. So impactful on both ends of the floor. And then some of the individual skills. Again, this is a percentile 1 to 100. So if you're 100, it means you're considered one of, if not the very best player at that particular skill in all of college basketball. Looking at Duke Miles' profile, steals are 97th percentile, playmaking 89th, free throws 86th, 2-point scoring 85th, 3-point scoring 83rd, assists 82nd. Turnovers was down at 48. He had turnover issues early in his career, but he had very few turnovers at Oklahoma. That was in a power conference on a good team where he was not the primary ball handler. That's kind of what the role would look like at Gonzaga. So I'm not as concerned about the turnovers because I don't think that's really what he's going to be asked to do. His rebounding is not good, but he's 6'2". So I don't think you're not bringing him in to rebound the basketball. So I don't think that's much of a concern for Duke Miles at this point. I like the player. I can't say I love that he can't make up his mind this offseason in the transfer portal, but if he wanted to come to Gonzaga, if he bought into the system, to the style, I think he could fit really nicely. And I think he does enough good stuff on both ends of the floor that he'd be a valuable player for this Gonzaga team were he to choose to come out to Spokane. Well, folks, Randy Bennett has a plan to counter Gonzaga's too big lineup next season. He landed another 7-footer out of the transfer portal. We're going to talk more about that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, there is nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena. And with Game Time, you can be part of all of that without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. And in fact, prices on the app actually go down the closer you get to tip-off. And their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. Plus, the all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay. We didn't do Zags in the NBA right now because we're waiting for some of these series to finish up, but Andrew Nembhard just had a tremendous game, double-double, 13 points, 13 assists for Indiana on Tuesday. If you want to see him in action on Game 3, that is on Friday in Indianapolis. If you're in the area, tickets to get in the door, just $120 for Indiana versus Cleveland. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets by using Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and folks, you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem that code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked on Zags podcast. And we're still talking transfer portal here. We're not talking about targets for Gonzaga. We just spoke about Duke Miles from Oklahoma, who fits a lot of the boxes for what Gonzaga is still looking for in the transfer portal. But now I want to look at some WCC moves. A couple of players departing the Pacific program, some tremendous players who were on Dave Smart's team last year landing elsewhere in the transfer portal. We also got a former top 100 prospect landing with Stan Johnson and LMU. But first, I want to talk about the latest addition to Randy Bennett and the Gales of St. Mary's. And it's, in fact, another transfer from Pacific. We're going to talk about their two elite guards who both found new homes in the portal. But first, let's talk about Jazz Gardner. Jazz Gardner is a 7-foot center from Pasadena, California. He was actually pursued by St. Mary's out of high school, but he began his college basketball career at Nevada. One year as a freshman with the Wolfpack, averaged about 2.5 points, 2 boards, 45% from the field. Only played 20 games, only played about 6.5 minutes per game. So Gardner decides to hit the transfer portal after his 1 year at Nevada, lands at Pacific. And this last year with Dave Smart and the Tigers, he started 27 out of their 33 games, but he wasn't particularly effective. He was much more efficient. He was about 45% from the field at Nevada. He was over 60% from the field at Pacific, and any 7-footer in the WCC should be 60+% because most of the teams don't have a ton of height. But he still only averaged 4.5 points and a little under 4 rebounds per game. He only played 17.5 minutes per game. The conditioning to stay on the floor for very long wasn't really a big thing for Gardner. He also got in foul trouble pretty regularly, so that's why the minutes were fairly limited. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think Jazz Gardner is very good. I watched him last year. I spoke with him at WCC Media Day. I didn't come away feeling like he was a particularly like he's a fine player for Pacific. I don't envision him being a player who is a big-time contributor for St. Mary's, unless Randy Bennett's seen something that I'm not, which is obviously very possible. But I think this addition is less about needing a player to come in and fill a super valuable role, and more so, we want size. We need bigs on this roster because we know Mark Few is coming at us with Graham Ike and Braden Huff, both in that starting lineup. And as anybody who watched the WCC championship game last year, Gonzaga just thrashed St. Mary's because of that lineup. Braden Huff just abused Paulus Morauskas in that starting lineup because they were starting Mitchell Saxon at the 5, and then they were starting Morauskas, who's about 6'8" at the 4, and it did not work against Huff and Ike. This year, obviously, Saxon is out the door. Morauskas is back. He's going to start again. He's an incredibly talented player. He should start once again. Henry Wessels will start at the 5. A very, very talented player who was the big reason Gonzaga lost in Moraga. He had a huge block shot against Graham Ike late in that game. So Wessels will start. They got Andrew McKeever on the bench. He's a 7-footer. And now they have Jazz Gardner, also a 7-footer. They got a ton of size. And they got this size not just to counter Gonzaga. Like, that's not their sole motivation here. I'm sure they see something in Gardner that they like, but it's a pretty big factor. I don't know if this is addition St. Mary's would make if Gonzaga didn't have both Huff and Ike coming back and projected in the starting lineup. So it's something to keep an eye on. The St. Mary's team obviously replacing 4 of their 5 starters, having already lost the three seniors in Marcelonis Saxon and Luke Barrett, losing Jordan Ross to the transfer portal. He ends up going over to Georgia. You got Mikey Lewis coming back. You got Morauskas coming back. You got a couple other guys like Wessels stepping into bigger roles. Gardner's a guy who I think could be a contributor for them, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's in a fairly limited role for this team next year. As we mentioned, a couple other Pacific players out the door. Lamar Washington and Elijah Fisher find new homes in the transfer portal. Washington going to join Damon Stoudemire and Georgia Tech in the ACC. Washington averaged 13.5 points and just under 6 assists per game last year. He's going to replace Nate George at point guard. George was a target for Gonzaga before he landed at Syracuse. Lamar Washington now becomes one of 3 guards from the WCC to land in the ACC, joining Nate Kings from Oregon State, who's at Syracuse, and DeMarco Minor, also from Oregon State, who is now at Pitt. So there's going to be a lot of former WCC guards starting in the ACC next year. Elijah Fisher not headed to the ACC, although he is headed out east, joining Shaheen Holloway and the Pirates of Seton Hall in the Big East. Fisher averaged about 16 points, 5 boards, 1.5 assists last year for the Tigers. He started his career at Texas Tech, same as Lamar Washington, was also at DePaul, so he's familiar with the Big East. Then spent this last year at Pacific, now heading out to Seton Hall. A tough, physical, bigger guard, really kind of tailor-made for what Shaheen Holloway likes to do at Seton Hall. I'm excited to see how this works out for him out in the Big East. And then last but not least, LMU, the Lions, Stan Johnson landing a former top 100 prospect out of the portal in Jalen Shelley. Shelley's a 6'8" forward. He was a top 75 prospect in the 2024 recruiting class. He actually committed to USC as a incoming freshman, but he didn't play much. 22 games for USC, only about 7.5 minutes per game, mostly playing in garbage time, averaged 2 points, 1.5 boards, hits the transfer portal. This is the kind of player that WCC programs have had plenty of success with in the past. The most notable example being Brandon Pajemski, who played very little at Illinois, transferred to Santa Clara, and blossomed into a superstar, conference player of the year, first-round pick, very, very good NBA player for the Golden State Warriors. That is like the best case possible scenario. We have seen it with other players who have quote unquote transferred down. I hate that phrase, especially with regard to the WCC, but we've seen it before and we've seen it work with other programs, other players. Morauskas himself from St. Mary's being a great example as a guy who didn't get much playing time at Arizona, transfers to St. Mary's and looked tremendous last year. We'll see what LMU can do with Shelley, a 6'8" forward who's going to help replace Javon Porter, who hit the transfer portal and landed at Missouri with the whole rest of his family who all played at Missouri previously. LMU also landed a transfer from Sacred Heart, Tanner Thomas. Thomas averaged 14.5 points and 6 boards, shot 37% from 3 last year for Sacred Heart. So he kind of ends up being their Will Johnston replacement as Will Johnston hit the portal and landed at Richmond in the A-10. Well, folks, Coach Lisa Fortier replenished the front court with a pair of transfer portal additions over the last week. Now we're going to take a look at how this roster is coming together in the post-Yvonne Ejim era. More on that coming up here in just a second. But first, did you know your Fire TV can also be an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. Play high-quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost of a console. And if you already have a console, well, no problem. A Fire TV Stick 4K device is more affordable and easier to travel with, allowing you to take you or your kids' games wherever you plug in. And maybe you don't have any interest in gaming. That's great news. The Amazon Fire TV Stick is the perfect go-to for all of your family's entertainment. We have one on literally every TV in our house. The platform's super easy to use and navigate, and it's really customizable too. So head to Fire TV or Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. The Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller is required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K second generation, Fire TV Stick 4K Max first and second generation, and Fire TV Cube third generation. All right, folks, closing out the show, talking about Lisa Fortier and the Gonzaga women's basketball team and a really reloaded roster heading into next season. We knew this team was going to have a lot of holes to fill on the roster after losing 4 really key players to graduation, a pair of other players to the transfer portal. And they just made 2 really big moves to really shore up the front court, which was, I think, an area that the guard play last year was questionable at times, and they've already made a few additions there. But losing Yvonne, losing Maud Hybens in the front court was just such a devastating loss for this team. And we were kind of waiting to see what are they going to do to help kind of fix the issues that they're going to have in the front court without those 2 talented players still in the mix. And they went out and over a course of the last week or so, landed 2 really critical players to fill those holes. One is Taylor Smith, 6'1" forward from Weber State. She's originally from Pocatello, Idaho, though, so it's a bit of a homecoming for her. Last year for Weber State, she averaged about 13 points, 6 boards, 2.5 assists per game. She also averaged 1.5 steals and 1.5 blocks, played about 30 minutes per game. Not a super efficient scorer necessarily, 42% on 2s, 28% from 3, but she was 83% from the free throw line. She was first team all Big Sky. And again, I think being in a system where she's not as relied upon offensively will probably help her with that efficiency, but was one of the best players in the Big Sky last year, a very, very talented scorer, and at 6'1", adds some size to Gonzaga's front court. He also added Sierra Lichtie, from Cal Poly, 6-foot forward, coming out of the Big West Conference. She's originally from Riverton, Utah. Last year for the Mustangs, averaged 10.5 points, little under 7 boards, 1.5 assists in 30 games played. She was about 50.5% on 2-pointers, 21.5% from 3. So again, the floor spacing's not exactly there with the 2 bigs coming in. 85% though from the free throw line. She was Big West tournament first team player. Also, like Smith, has 2 years of eligibility remaining. So both these players could be in the mix for Gonzaga, not only this upcoming season, but the year after that as well. Coach Fortier is tremendous at developing talent. Just look no further than Ejim or the Worth twins, or just the list goes on and on and on for this team in terms of Mott Hybens is a great example, Melody Kempton, etc. So getting a couple players in who can develop for a few years in the system, I think will definitely help. And again, first big moves to address the front court for Coach Fortier this offseason. They did bring in 2 guards already in the portal. One of them, Taryn Gardner from Spokane, played at Meade High School, played her freshman year of college at Boise State, averaged about 3.5 points in 13 minutes per game. Now she's coming back to Spokane, got 3 years of eligibility remaining. The other one is Z Akuso coming over from St. Mary's. The second straight year, Gonzaga's landing a starting guard from St. Mary's. Taylor Dalton came over last year. This year, it's Akuso. Last year, she averaged 9 points, 3.5 assists, 3 boards in 25 minutes a game for the Gales. So another veteran guard, 2 years of eligibility remaining, started in the WCC last year, coming in to help replace the player that she played with as a freshman in Taylor Dalton. So looking at this roster, you have 4 big-time transfers coming in. You got some freshmen coming in. You got a redshirt last year, and Lauren Whitaker, has been praised as a potential huge game changer for Gonzaga. If she's healthy coming into this year, that's a huge potential addition for them. But again, it's going to be, if you watched a lot of Gonzaga women's basketball last year, you're not going to see a lot of familiar faces because Ejim's in the WNBA, still on the roster with the Indiana Fever. We're hoping she does not get cut, but the tough competition to make that roster for her. You also lose Hybens, Esther Little, and Taylor Dalton to graduation. Claire O'Connor transfers to Colorado. Bree Salenbian transfers to Ball State. So your key returners are really Allie Turner, who was tremendous last year, probably the second best player on this roster, and was the second best player last year, is probably the best player coming into this season. Inez Betancourt, who showed flashes of excellence last year as a guard, transferring in from UConn, and then McKinley Dallin, who transferred from Minnesota, who played a small role in the front court. Those are your 3 main returners on this roster, alongside Lauren Whitaker, 6'3" big from New Zealand, who sat out last year, but again, has a lot of pedigree. So I think now you're looking at a lineup that's probably going to be fairly transfer heavy. I expect Turner to start as a returner, and then I expect Lauren Whitaker, if she's healthy, to start as a returner as well, although she has not played in this system yet. But I think your other starting spots are probably all going to be filled by transfers. In fact, at this point, I'm projecting a starting lineup of Turner, Akuso from St. Mary's, Lichtie and Smith, the 2 forwards from Cal Poly and Weber State, as well as Whitaker. If Whitaker is not healthy, not able to start the year, I would probably take her out of the starting lineup and add Betancourt, and you just have a smaller lineup with the 2 newcomers starting in the front court, and then you have a 3-guard lineup outside of that. So the offseason is not done, though. I expect more additions for Coach Fortier and the Zags, but definitely exciting to see them make some big moves with a couple of really talented players from the West Coast, and Smith and Lichtie joining this roster heading into next season. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. I want to thank all of you for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you can find the show ad-free on Amazon Music if you have not checked it out there. You can also hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you have not done so yet. Get notified for every episode. We're trying to get to 3,500 subscribers. We should be getting there very soon. If you haven't done so yet, that would be much appreciated. We'll be back with one more episode on Friday, hoping it's going to be a real special one for you all. Trying to line that all up right now. But again, thanks for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Enjoy the NBA playoffs for those of you watching it. And as always, go Zags.